Welcome to Learn Something New Today, a podcast where we talk to interesting people doing interesting things. I'm your host, Anthony Miliàn. And today we have an amazing guest. He's an author. I read that you a Morehouse professor.
I am, yes.
Yeah, my brother went to Morehouse. We love Morehouse men in this house. And so Donovan X Ramsey, he's the author of, let me get this right, When Crack Was King, A People's History of a Misunderstood Era. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me, Anthony. I am a huge fan.
Well, thank you so much.
This is a pleasure.
Thank you. First question that I want to ask is, what made you write this book?
I decided to take on this topic because, one, I am a child of this era. I grew up in a community that was hard hit by the crack epidemic. Several members of my family, were impacted by it. And as I grew and I got into journalism, I was shocked at the amount of distortion that I saw in the record, but also just the lack of coverage overall. There were basic questions that hadn't been answered, like why did it happen? What was its scale? Why did it end? Basic things like that. A lot of people don't even know what crack actually is.
Right.
So, I saw it as a moment that was incredibly consequential, both for the community that I know and love, but also for the country. And no one had really taken the time to take it seriously, so to speak. So that's why I wrote the book.
Well, I read the book for pretty much same reason. I grew up in Brooklyn. I'm a child of the era. I was born in 1987. I'm old.
We are exactly the same old.
Okay, there we go. There we go. So I'm a child of the era. I grew up in Brooklyn. I had a myriad of different family members that both sold and were addicted to crack cocaine. And one of the things that I think people miss that you covered in your book is the functional crack addict, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that a lot of people in my family were. They had city jobs, police officers, paralegals, lawyers, and they were doing crack cocaine. One of the things that I found really interesting as far as your book goes is that you dedicated your book. The dedication was I'm gonna write I wrote it down. Um, you dedicated it to the marginalized, and then also to a specific no specific demographic. It's kind of all encompassing.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do that?
Mm-hmm. I found myself writing constantly about the people impacted by the crack epidemic and trying to find a shorthand, because I would end up using this long phrase over and over again. I would say, you know, um, poor people in major cities, disproportionately Black and Latino, but not exclusively Black and Latino. And it was this clunky phrase, right? That was precise, but it was hard to write and sort of hard to read. Um, I tried to, funny enough, get my editor to let me use niggas. Because I was like, there has to be a word, right? Has no one coined a phrase to describe this group. And I realized, oh, this is what we mean when we say niggas.
Right.
Or the faces at the bottom of the well, or the wretched of the earth,
Right.
or the least among us, right? That's what those phrases mean. And because I could not do that, I had to ask myself, well, what really describes this group of people? And I came out with those three M's, which was marginalized, misunderstood, and maligned. And that is what I think it really means to be raced in this country, to be sort of created as an underclass,
Right.
is to be the victim of those three things: marginalization, misunderstanding, and maligning.
Right. One of the things that I learned from your book is that there's no such thing as a crack baby. In the
Hmm.
80s, in the 90s, I mean, I have relatives that tell me I went to the hospital and I held this crack baby and they were just crying and da 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 da. Da. And I read your book, and it says
Yeah.
you tackle the narrative of the crack baby, and we now know that it was deeply exaggerated, if not it was a flat out lie. What does this tell us about American media culture that an entire generation of children, because even today, I mean, we have people born in 2010, and they'll
Yeah.
tell you, "Oh, so and so's a crack baby," or "This person's a crack baby." And during the 80s, we had I don't know if you remember this, the music video, "Your mama smokes crack rock."
Uh-huh.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
And I mean, what does this tell us about the media culture, and that an entire generation of children could be labeled as biologically doomed when it was all a lie?
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
You know, that myth, that sort of specter coming out of the period. I mean, we all talk about the super predator, the crackhead, the crack baby, that these are labels that are concepts that then got applied to not just people who were really drug involved, right? But really became labels that got used against the entire community. And, as you sort of suggested for folks that haven't read the book, that entire theory was based on research by a guy named Ira Chasnov out of Chicago, who was a drug researcher. And he basically had done a study on really a handful of women whose babies were cocaine exposed, is the term that they use. I think it was less than 20 or so women. And from that, he published a paper that made all of these projections. One, it described what it meant to be a cocaine exposed baby, and he said that they were small and had problems sort of adjusting and had nervous conditions. And he also then projected that they would be that they would have developmental disabilities and struggle for the rest of their lives. That was not something that he discovered through research, right? It was essentially a guess, or like a hypothesis, and he published that paper, and the news media picked it up, and it blew up, right, without any additional reporting
Right.
or research, because I think a few things. One, um, most journalists are not educated in research and sciences and social sciences, so they can very easily take any stat and twist it into a narrative without the proper context. Also, what I took away from it was an eagerness beyond a willingness, a eagerness to label an entire generation of black and brown children as deficient,
Hmm.
as disposable, as not a part of our society. One of the things that came out of it, Charles Krauthammer, who was a columnist for the Washington Post, said that these babies were better off dead
Oof.
in his column.
Well, look at where he is today.
you know and to add to that, so years later, there was a woman named Dr. Hurt out of Albert Einstein Hospital in Philadelphia, who actually did a longitudinal study on cocaine exposed babies, and not just a handful, right? But an actual number of participants that you could extrapolate from the data. And what she found was that there were no developmental differences in those children based on their peers. Now, what does that mean? It does not mean that that people should use cocaine while they're pregnant.
Of course not.
Because, right? Because what you do get is a higher percentage of premature birth. That the, uterus separates from, um, um, I'm blanking. This is me blanking on female anatomy, but that what it does is that it results in these premature births that then the symptoms of that were being associated with cocaine exposure, things like being underweight, and all the things that come along with being premature. But I mean, what we do find though is that the worst thing a pregnant person can do is actually consume alcohol, that the effects of alcohol exposure in a baby are far more significant than what they saw with cocaine.
Right.
So, we still deal with the consequences of that myth today because most people never stopped to ask any questions.
Right. One thing that you covered in your book that I really found interesting, there's so many aspects of your book that I found interesting, but this specific one was Janet Cook. Um, she fabricated a whole story about this child in DC, and it essentially reinforced white America's worst fears about
Yeah.
Black urban culture. Now, when we look at the ramifications of what happened, like today, I believe, I don't know where she works, but it says it's something has nothing to do with writing at all,
Mhm.
right? Completely ostracized from the journalistic field, from the industry of journalism. And we live in a day where everyone is a citizen journalist and
Yeah.
everyone is putting out information. And we just had this guy in Minnesota go to Minnesota and make up this whole fairy tale about this fraud that was happening in the Somali communities, to the point where our president sent in ICE. Two people are dead. From a journalistic perspective, you know, if she did this today, would the ramifications be as bad, or would she be rewarded for it? What does that
Yeah.
say about the field of journalism? You're the expert in that.
Yeah. You know, Janet Cook is an interesting character. Like you said, she wrote a story about an 8-year-old heroin addict in Washington, D.C. for the Washington Post, and won a Pulitzer Prize for it. She's the first Black woman to win a Pulitzer Prize in a journalism category. And the story for which she won it was a complete fabrication. And the reason why I find Janet Cook to be so fascinating is because she understood something about the newsroom. She understood something about the public's appetite for horror in the Black community and the extent to which they would reward a Black journalist who would produce that kind of reporting. She was only found out because people in her hometown saw the AP story about her winning and noticed discrepancies in her resume.
Wow.
So they flagged the AP, we think you got some of your facts wrong. But otherwise, the entire newsroom at the Washington Post didn't catch it through all the practices that they're supposed to have. The Pulitzer Committee didn't catch it. The AP, when they interviewed her, didn't catch it. So I think what we're discovering all these years later, to your question, is that too much of journalism has operated on an honor system, and that there have always been these twisted incentives to tell certain stories over others, especially when it comes to Black America, that the type of integrity that we expect to be in play in newsrooms is not always. And that's the crack that she slipped through.
Yeah.
That Janet Cook was not some criminal mastermind. She was an observant person who saw where the fault lines were and decided that she could um, scam her way to the top.
Right.
And she would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for those pesky kids back in Toledo, to quote Scooby Doo,
Yeah.
who said, "Wait a minute."
Right.
So, and what also, what it proves to me is how easy it is to lie on Black people.
Mm-hmm.
It,
Yep.
there are people, and I won't name any programs, but I, see cable news all the time. They'll have some scholarly Black man or woman who has devoted their entire life to studying issues of race and identity and politics. debating just a white guy who has hot takes about why things are happening in black communities,
Right.
and that voice is given equal value amongst real or like alongside real scholarship, because it's easy to lie on us.
Absolutely.
And that's why I got into storytelling, was to help correct the record.
Absolutely. You tackle you're right up my lane when it comes to like this history, because
Mhm.
I love the history of my era, the 80s, and the things that happened during the crack era. You talk about Len Bias.
Oh yeah.
This guy, this kid was supposed to be the next Michael Jordan.
Hmm.
He was framed as the next Michael Jordan, and he goes to this party. He's given he's given cocaine or crack or something. He has a heart issue. Comes out
Hmm.
later that he has a heart arrhythmia. The crack exacerbates that. He collapses. He dies of a heart attack. Right. He had just got drafted to the Boston Celtics. He was supposed to be the future for his family. America sees that because here's this kid in the spotlight. He's getting these brand deals. He's getting this, and his life is over like that.
Hmm.
And white America sees that, and they use his death as a catalyst for sweeping drug legislation. Do you think that this moment reflects how tragedy, black tragedy, can compress complexity into political urgency? And was the policy response proportionate to the actual data?
Hmm. That's a fantastic question, right? Like Len Bias's case really was sad, right? This talented young man who had a loving family, who had worked his butt off to get to where he was. I mean, top draft pick to the Celtics. Um, and celebrating that. I mean, it was a cautionary tale that I think a lot of young black men our age got told, either in Dare or in sports programs. Stay away from drugs because just one time could kill you, just like Len Bias.
Yeah. Yeah.
The real story, right, was that Len Bias's friends who were using with him said it was not Len's first time using cocaine. It was actually not crack, it was powder cocaine he was using, that some of that residue was found in the investigation afterwards. And a good friend of his that he was using drugs with was later put on trial for his death. Um, yes, black tragedy is often distorted. Black facing problems oftentimes get white facing solutions, and that the things that are very real to us are misused to achieve other purposes. At least that's what I found in my reporting. So in this case, you had the 100-to-1 disparity between crack and powder cocaine in sentencing comes out of Len Bias's death. It's the Democrats and the Republicans both deciding that they could campaign on crime and drugs and use this high profile tragedy to that end. And they just kept one upping each other. Maybe it should be 2-to-1. No, it'd be 10-to-1. We can go harder than that, until they landed at 100-to-1. And the result was not ending the crack epidemic, right? It was not stemming the flow of cocaine from Central America into the United States. It was not getting people into treatment. The result was criminalizing black men like Len Bias, young black men who were making similar mistakes, and keeping them in prison for years on end. So that's something that we have to be careful about, right? Is the how our real reality, right? The persistence of crime in our neighborhoods, the actual fear that we have of crime can be misused for political purposes and policies that we never asked for.
Right. Now, I wanted to bring it to current times, right? We see epidemics now. It's not a crack; it's an opioid epidemic. It's not affecting the black community as much. It's affecting the white. We're seeing a completely different response. We're seeing the introduction of Narcan. We're seeing EMTs with vastly different equipment. We're seeing medical professionals being taught harm reduction and things like that. These things came out of the 80s with people like Kurt Schmoke,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who who was considered unequipped to handle his city's problems because he was like, listen, this is what we need to do, and it's not throwing people in jail. How do you think when we look at the when we look at the overall grand scheme of today's epidemic versus yesterday's, how much of it do you look at and go, we've learned so much, I wish it could have applied to our people?
Yeah, yeah. It it breaks your heart. It really does to think about the kinds of interventions that could have been made and the lives that could have been saved had the crack epidemic been treated for what it was, which was a public health crisis and not a criminal crisis. I think about all of the money wasted, taxpayer dollars wasted on incarcerating people, and we could have created systems that would have prepared us for the moment that we're in now.
Right.
Because as long as drugs have existed, we have dealt with drug trends and epidemics. You know, marijuana, cocaine several times, opioids several times. That is a part of American history. When I look at what's happening with the response to opioids, I see a difference because of the people who are um, victim to it. um, there was I think a New York Times Magazine story about the children of the opioid epidemic. I think might have been the headline, and I thought this same outlet was calling Black children crack babies.
Babies. Yeah.
You know, this sort of dismissing of even children.
Mhm.
So I think that that's a reason for this softness and this new heart that America now has for the problem of drugs. Even though it's important to say, right, that the majority of people that were using crack were white, right? Like the majority of Americans are white.
Yeah.
Therefore, anything that becomes popular is going to be primarily white. Black and Latino folks were using crack at disproportionate rates, and our neighborhoods were the site of the drug trade. So then it became associated with Black people. But because the opioids are associated with white people, there's been a much softer sort of public reaction
Right.
alongside the political reaction. The other thing that I want to say, though, is that we are seeing that shift.
Hmm.
So there have been waves of this opioid epidemic where first it was prescription pills.
Right.
So then it was very white because we don't get prescribed pain meds,
Mhm.
right? So it was a white epidemic at that point. And then once there was a crackdown on the doctors that were prescribing prescription pills, a lot of users and dealers then moved to synthetic drugs like fentanyl.
Right.
And you saw a real rise in that during the leading up into the pandemic, the
Right.
COVID pandemic. And at that moment, that it was becoming more of a street drug, you
Hmm.
started seeing deaths among Black and Latino men in particular from opioids spiking. And alongside of that, you started seeing more criminalization of opioids. To now we're at the point, right, where Donald Trump is blowing up ships coming from Venezuela and other countries claiming that it is a result of some sort of drug trade. So now we're seeing a return to old school draconian policy
Hmm.
because the substances are being more associated with people of color.
Color.
And that's a tool, right? That's, yeah, allegedly, right? Because
A
we don't
white
even know if
supremacist
that's
tool.
the case. It is to take something that could touch anybody and to use it as a pretext for attacking one group of people is a tool of white supremacy.
It's 100% a tool of white supremacy. So we're almost done here. Are you working on anything new? What's the agenda? What's the plan?
Yeah.
How can people get in contact with you? I mean, I follow you on Substack and on Instagram. How can people get in contact with you?
Man, so I am all over, Anthony. I am teaching by day. I teach journalism at Morehouse, which is my alma mater. But I'm still writing all the time. I maintain a Substack called Had Happened. That is hadhappened.substack.com. I'm working on my next project, which is funny enough, about Janet Cook. I won't spoil it too much for you, but I'm very interested in what her story tells us about journalism. But also, I'm interested in just where she's been. So that's the next sort of long project, and I'm just trying to survive America, man.
You and
You
me both.
know.
Any lasting words that you want to leave my audience with? Any positive, anything you have to say?
Yeah. One thing that I want to highlight is that as terrible as the crack epidemic was, we survived it as a people, and we survived it without a whole lot of help from anybody else. And the ways that we survived it, I say, is our superpower, and that's community. That is saying to a cousin, you can't live here, but you can stay here overnight until you figure out what you got going on.
Yep.
It's churches doing gun buybacks. It's grandmothers taking in grandchildren and raising them until their kids could get out of prison or off the streets. It's all the things that we do naturally that people never got any help for,
Right.
that kept us alive long enough for that storm to pass.
Right.
So when I set out to write this book, I didn't know that was going to be the answer, and I documented how that was the answer. And it left me with such a feeling of strength that the same people that survived enslavement and colonization and Jim Crow and so many other things also survived this other weapon.
Right.
And we are stronger where we were broken before. It's like a broken bone, right? They
Right.
say when you break a bone, you can never break it in that same place again.
Get stronger.
Um, it's stronger. That I believe that that's the case for us as a community.
Awesome. Well, Donovan X Ramsey, thank you for coming on. This has learned something new today.
Thank you so much for having me.